Hey, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
Hey, that's Andrew Sullivan you're holding up on your iPad. A picture of Andrew, not Andrew himself.
Correct. And it's not going to morph.
Well, lucky him. He's not going to turn into Michael McFaul the way I did last week.
Correct. And I'm not trolling anybody. But you probably can't guess why I'm holding him up.
You're correct. You are correct.
He's a non-blue checkmark Twitter user who manages to get his message out without a blue checkmark, and therefore is the exception that proves the rule.
The rule being?
The rule being, if you don't have a blue check, you're wasting your time on Twitter. If you and I've reached that conclusion. I suddenly realized that I tweet, spend a lot of time tweeting, way too much, because I want to reach like reporters for and experts and people who have blue check marks. And they're not reading me anymore. And there are three possible reasons for that. One is they just turned off me. I'm a hopeless case. Why pay attention to this kook?
I could see that.
That happens. That happens. Yeah. Second, Twitter generally suppresses views it doesn't like, and it's not transparent. So who knows what it's doing?
Yeah.
And the third, though, is this blue check mark thing where they have this button that blue check marks can press, and they only see the tweets of other blue check marks. So they're all talking to each other. They're not talking to you, and they're not talking to me. And unless you're Andrew Sullivan and have incredible energy to break through, you're wasting your time. You're talking to the people who are by definition not the most important people you want to talk to. That's not true in all cases, and they're a great bunch of people. Don't get me wrong. The non-blue people, but
who is in on the conspiracy to suppress you and me, Mickey? I am a fellow non-blue check mark. You know who's in on the conspiracy?
Ann Applebaum?
Probably, but that's not who I had in mind. The New York Times, here's a piece, and this is a coincidence that was going to mention this. We didn't plan this, but there was a piece in the New York Times this week called How to Avoid Sharing Misinformation on the War in Ukraine. Here are warning signs to look for before you retweet. Okay, before you retweet, you should look for these. Number one, according to the New York Times, are they verified? They elaborate. On Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, many people, including journalists, have blue check marks next to their names to indicate their identities have been confirmed. I don't even think that's true. I don't think Facebook has this, but maybe. Anyway, it says, these accounts, meaning like verified ones, make mistakes too, and good information can come from people who are not verified, but the absence of a check could give you a reason to look for other red flags and pause before hitting that retweet button. Thank you, New York Times. We were not oppressed enough. Who wrote this? Daniel Victor. Dan, I just want to extend a hearty expression of gratitude to you. Because, Twitter was not stratified enough by perceived social status until you stepped in and made the problem worse. I'm sorry, Mickey. I get very emotional about this, You know why? Because I feel sorry for you. This is not about me.
It's compassion, Bob.
It's compassion. It's non-cognitive empathy. That's what I have for you.
I did an experiment where I said, all my blue checkmark friends, if you read this, if you have this button that lets you exclude non-blue check marks, do you use it? And you might think that this would be
nobody replied because nobody.
You might think it'd be a stupid experiment because people the true groups would be exclusive. Anybody who would see this wouldn't be a blue check mark. But no, I was hoping that there'd be some big shot blue check marks who read me who say, no, Mickey, I still read you. No, that didn't happen. Okay, yeah. It seems to be the overlap between the two groups is getting smaller and smaller. And I think this just happened in the last couple of years. People just, I think it sort of was a tipping point, as some would say.
Well, I think it's
as Malcolm Gladwell, who I'm sure has a blue check mark, would say.
No doubt. And the funny thing is, the original rationale they've completely abandoned. The original thing was it was to ward off fake accounts. So if it was for people like Donald Trump, who had people imitating them. And this was Twitter's way of guaranteeing that you're the real deal. Then they came up with this whole different system, which, by the way, gives you no credit for writing a book. If you look at the things that are, I finally, for the first time, like about a year and a half ago, went through the process. I had never tried before. And you have to, there's several categories, none of which apply to me except kind of being a journalist, I guess. So if I've written for, publication, officially acknowledged publications 3 times in the last 6 months or something, well, I write all my stuff for my newsletter now. The books don't help at all. Books don't count at all. Do I sound aggrieved?
Yeah, no, we should probably wrap this up soon, or else we'll get a lot of comments about I've had enough whinging about blue checks. But this is similar to Eric Adams' mask policy. It's good. He says if you're an entertainer or a performer, vax policy, you don't have to get vaxxed. And there's a huge outrage about that. So why isn't there a similar outrage about this? They're all violations of social equality, Bob.
Well, that's my final point. It's just that the Twitter people pose as progressives, and yet they've decided that they should be the arbiters of status and power. Seriously, it's completely crazy. It's not even a
meritocracy. It's a woke millennialocracy.
They would say, it's about as close to one as anything else in the world, maybe. There are criteria, but it's just funny.
There's one category of are you important? And I don't think there are any hard objective criteria for that.
No, I think they have something they check for.
They look at your Wikipedia page.
No, I'm not sure. No, that is not an official part of it. I think I'd be okay if they looked at the Wikipedia page.
I read them. No, they look and see if you have a Wikipedia page.
Do they?
I think in another category, not the journalist category, in the famous category.
Well, so you have to claim you're famous and direct them to your Wikipedia page?
There are like 5. Yes. The answer is yes.
Anyway, since this is more important than the war on Ukraine, I think in Ukraine we should keep talking about it.
Anyway, in the Parrot Room, I will talk about how I'm going to try to get around this problem, which probably won't work.
And I will talk about, not to play one-upsmanship here, Mickey, but whereas all the blue check marks completely ignore you, in the last couple of weeks, I almost think I'm in like a kind of a, well, no, that would be to exaggerate my importance, to say that I'm part of a retweeting proxy war between Glenn Greenwald and Chris Hayes, but I did get successively retweeted by the two, and I just have an interesting report on the implications of that. So,
but that is the way you get noticed, is by picking a fight with somebody, and then a blue check mark, and then they get in the fight, and all the other blue check marks.
No, they both retweeted me approvingly. That's the interesting thing. Who else can make that claim, by the way? I ask you. So the good news on Ukraine, right? Today's good news?
That Zelensky asked Biden to not go too hard on Roman Abramovich because he could be a middleman.
Not what I had in mind. He's the guy who owned a soccer team and recently let go of it.
I thought that was a good sign that Zelensky was really interested in negotiations if he says, don't be punitive against this guy. Anyway, no?
There was a sign
more important.
Sign of Russian interest in negotiations. This guy named Sergei Rudskoy of the Russian Armed Forces issued a statement, and Russia seems to have abandoned their maximalist aims. Now they're acting like this was never about more than the liberation of Donbass.
Right.
They don't mention demilitarization and denazification. And moreover, they say, we could have gone about the Donbass via the kind of local route, just focusing on Donbass, or a strategy of kind of going, for the whole country first as a way to get the Donbass. Well, that's what we chose. So they're already setting up their narrative where they were not thwarted. Great. They were not thwarted. This was the plan all along.
And has this been approved by the Kremlin?
Oh, clearly. This is an official guy. There was a Reuters piece on it and a lot of knowing tweeting about it.
That's interesting because the most interesting piece I've read in the past week, and you know what I'm going to say, was flagged to me by my friend John Ellis, was the Niall Ferguson piece in Bloomberg, which said, we all think that Biden is giving aid to Ukraine in a way that avoids the threat of escalation into nuclear war in the hopes that they will do well enough that you can achieve a negotiated peace, okay? And he said, no, that's not Biden's strategy. Biden's strategy is to keep the war going in the hopes of bleeding Putin dry, so Putin will fall, and it'll be a lesson for China. It's like the classic neocon double bank shot, except without the threat of nuclear weapons. And if this is happening, that's going to, if that is Biden's strategy, and I haven't seen it confirmed anywhere else, this is going to thwart it. If they actually do a deal, how are the neocons going to stop this deal from happening?
Well, I mean, Zelensky could stop it from happening. It has to be saleable to the Ukrainian people in some sense. I mean, Zelensky has made noises about requiring a referendum for any deal. In any event, it has to be he has to be able to, in some sense, sell it. Also, there are things there's a lot to be worked out. Like Russia, are they going to want the land bridge to hang on to the land bridge? It sounds as if they're no longer thinking about Odessa or Kharkiv, these, much less Kyiv. But there's a lot to be worked out. What kind of sanctions relief do they expect?
Why hasn't the stock market soared 3,000 points?
Well, because we are a long way from anything actually happening. This is step.
That never bothers the stock market.
There's so many moving parts here. And, what does Ukraine have to agree to by way of, NATO neutralization? What form will that take? There's a lot to be worked out.
I hope it doesn't interrupt Zelensky's appearance before the Oscars.
Oh, you're kidding. He's going to do that?
I'm not kidding.
That guy is a master.
I think that's a disaster. I think that'll be the shark jumping moment. He has a cookie cutter approach to it, which he picks something in your history that was a test of your character. And he says, oh, America, this is like Pearl Harbor. Oh, Britain, this is like we'll fight you on the beaches. Oh, Viktor Orban, this is, you should go to this monument of the shoes of the Jews that were killed. Israel, he said this was like the Holocaust, okay?
What will he say to Hollywood?
This is like Ishtar.
This is like Netflix.
This is like what was the movie that was 7 hours long?
Yeah, well, Ishtar is a famous disaster.
Yeah, but there's another one that was done by the guy who had a sex change operation or was about to. The guy who did the guy who did the Vietnam movie where they played Russian roulette.
Speaking of which,
Deer Hunter, the guy who did Deer Hunter, Michael Cimino, Heaven's Gate.
Oh yeah,
this is Heaven's Gate.
Did you know that Putin has gone? He's playing the cancel culture card, the anti-wokeism card.
Yes, and
he said, like yesterday, recently they canceled the children's writer Joanne Rowling. He means J.K. Rowling, because she, the author of books that have sold hundreds of millions of copies worldwide, fell out of favor with fans of so-called gender freedoms. So he's like, anyway, I was going to say, the Hollywood thing will play right into his narrative, by the way. Zelensky showing up in Hollywood, that plays right into Putin's narrative.
That's the main reason it's such a disaster, yeah.
Now, this is totally a bridge too far. That said, it'll probably work, but still.
A friend of mine thought that maybe when Zelensky brands things fake news and talks about cancel culture, he's actually not using the Russian words for those things. The Western press is just interpreting it as if he were talking like a Trumpist MAGA person.
When Putin says this stuff?
They want to get at Trumpist MAGA. They want to portray Putin as a MAGA person. Maybe he wasn't saying fake news or cancel culture. Maybe he was just saying.
But when you mention J.K. Rowling, I think that's it's pretty undeniable. And you say she was canceled.
Somebody who speaks Russian would know. I don't speak Russian.
This seems pretty clear. So I don't know. That's kind of promising. I mean, it still is. You're still having to swallow if Putin winds up settling for the Donbass and Ukraine agrees, you're still having to swallow the fact that he acquired land through an invasion, which I would have liked to have avoided, but I will not revisit my complaints about how nobody in the Blob wanted to negotiate a much better deal that wouldn't have been.
Are you now certain of that?
Certain of what?
That Blinken did not offer any kind of acceptable deal.
I haven't heard anyone claim he offered to just halt NATO expansion shy of Ukraine permanently. And I don't think I've even heard that he offered to return to the Minsk agreement. And I think those two things would have gone a long way. But we'll never know. My question is, what would have been the harm in offering? We'd be in a better position now if we could say we tried.
Well, the argument is that it's appeasement. I don't buy it, but that is.
Well, yeah, but compared to what? That's my point. This is going to be much bigger appeasement.
But it would still. I still love it, and it frustrates the delusional neocon ambitions that Niall Ferguson talks about. He thinks they're delusional too, by the way. Even though he's been accused of being a neocon. Yeah, he thinks it's crazy. So the gnashing it, because it sort of makes sense of what Ann Applebaum writes a piece saying Ukraine must win. Okay, we want Ukraine to win. We shouldn't, but I'll leave the means of that to the experts. So it's a contentless piece. You don't know what these people are driving at, unless it only sort of makes sense if they're driving at something like Putin's downfall.
Right, but she's way short of that, because did you see her qualifier? She said, in the end, Ukraine must win. Now, it may not have the same borders it has now, and it may not be part of NATO ever, but it must win. Well, that's what everybody is expecting at this point, that there will be a Ukraine in the end, and it won't probably won't have the same border. Yeah, there was this sentence that makes you wonder, what is this piece about? And she
isn't necessarily driving for Putin's downfall, but there's this vague thing where you want to sort of push for more, and what is the more they're pushing for if they're willing to settle for the same thing everybody else is willing to settle for? Elliot Cohen too. I mean, and so if the secret objective is really to push for Putin's downfall, that would sort of make sense of the Atlantic magazine, right?
Yeah, I'm sure that would be her highest hope. Look, we'd all be happy with that.
That's not the problem. But she also had one of the silliest sentences I've ever read, which is, "We shouldn't be scared of nuclear escalation in a nuclear war because Putin wants us to be scared, Bob. So we shouldn't be scared." But I'm amazed you didn't pick on that sentence.
I didn't read the whole thing, but, I agree. You should always do the opposite of whatever anybody tells you to do. If they say don't die in a nuclear Armageddon, die in a nuclear Armageddon, because that'll show them, and then they won't be messing with you down the road.
So anyway, it was a little jarring that Biden starts talking about things like New World Order, I thought, implying that there is a more grandiose goal he has than just settling this damn war on terms that allow Ukraine to still exist. And why is he doing that?
What does he have in mind? I didn't hear that part. What did he
I don't
say?
Know.
What he means?
It was the headline in Drudge. I actually didn't see what he had in mind, but he talked. And it'd be a. I assume it's some sort of united democracies stronger than ever. At the same time, everybody's realizing that we actually don't have the world on our side. We have like half the world on our side.
Well, yeah. I mean, India, China, Brazil have not condemned the invasion.
And the most interesting one is Israel. I was in a room with some local pro-Israel mockers, Jewish mockers, and they said Zelensky has blown it. Israel was so offended by this Holocaust speech. How could he say this? They were really anti-Zelensky. And that's a huge problem for the Israel lobby in America, because America is pro-Zelensky. And if Israel is anti-Zelensky, how do they, make that palatable? In part, it's because Russia controls Syria and they let Israel do their airstrikes in Syria, which Israel really values, which is actually a blow against us because we've been saying, what does it matter if Russia controls Syria? Well, that's one way it matters. Anyway, I thought it was shocking. I was shocked.
It came out that this week that Israel has been blocking the sale of this NSO group spyware, what's it called, Pegasus, to the Ukrainian government for fear of offending Russia. And, they've sold it to like Saudi Arabia, all these horrible governments, but they've refused to sell it to Ukraine. I mean, one thing is, there were, like today or yesterday, there were pro-Russia protests in Tel Aviv. There are a lot of people in Israel who are from Russia, right? And
they fled Russia.
Well, whatever.
My mother fled Germany. She wasn't in any pro-German demonstrations.
Yeah, well,
I can tell you that.
I don't know. You tell me. It wasn't a huge crowd. It wasn't as big as the pro-Ukraine demonstrations, but they had the Russian flags, and it wasn't nothing. And I think there were two different versions of it. It seemed like one downtown and one out in some park. Could have been staged by stagers of these things. But
the other two interesting angles I saw were, one, the composition of Russia's military is heavy on minorities. Basically, if you're an affluent Russian, you get out. The same. It's like the Vietnam era draft, but worse. So it winds up with I don't know which the minorities are, but the Kazakhs, are they a discrete and insular minority? They're
a Soviet minority. I don't know how many are in Russia proper.
So these 10,000 to 15,000 casualties aren't that damaging to Russia because Putin doesn't give a shit about them because they're only minorities. And so it's the losses they're racking up aren't as devastating as 15,000 casualties would be in the U.S. That's our standard. Well, there's a big
Turkic Muslim population around the city of Kazan. That's not the same as Kazakhstan, but I mean, then there's Chechens, of course.
Yeah. Well, they get the poorest, and they lure people in who are poor and can't. Have the army is a better option for them than it is for a university student in Moscow.
I've heard of that happening in countries. Yes.
Yeah. And the second thing is there was an interesting story. We're relying, I think, on Pentagon data that Putin had not been indiscriminate in his airstrikes. He had actually largely attacked military targets, tried to avoid civilian targets, had left the center of Kyiv untouched. And even some of these, the horrible scenes at the mall, well, maybe they thought it was a military target. So yes, he's done horrible things, but it could be so much more worse. And it implies that there's an intelligence guiding it that's not completely demonic.
Yeah,
at least it's constrained by world opinion.
I'm writing about this in today's Non-Zero newsletter. This is, you directed my attention to the consortium news piece where this guy, Joe Loria or something, argued that this is an actual Pentagon counterattack against the State Department. The State Department has been saying, there are war crimes and so on, and the Pentagon's afraid that's going to be used to draw us more deeply into the war.
But all the sources were all defense contractors. They weren't actual Pentagon.
No. One of the big anonymous forces was from the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency in the Pentagon.
So this is a Lloyd Austin versus Tony Blinken.
That's the conjecture, but it certainly is the case. So this was, the piece itself was written by this guy. What's his name? William Alton or something. He is a noted Arkin. He is a noted defense correspondent of long standing, and I think a veteran as well. But he wrote it. But he quoted a couple of people, one of whom is a senior analyst in DIA, making the case you made that look, if Putin really wanted to wipe out a lot of civilian, Kyiv would be in ashes now. And there are different stories like Kyiv, Kharkiv, Mariupol. Mariupol is the one that looks most like Grozny, the Chechenian city that was leveled a couple of times by the Russians. But Kyiv itself, you mentioned that shopping mall. I think there's now a fair amount of evidence that there were military vehicles parked there out of sight. And in fact, I think the Ukrainian who had taken pictures of them with a smartphone, put them on the internet, has been arrested.
It's like all shopping malls that was bankrupt because of Amazon, right? So
they just figured, what the hell, let's park some trucks. I mean, also there are some people claiming artillery was actually being fired from there, but I've seen the pictures of the military vehicles. I think. Go ahead.
It's entirely possible that this DIA guy did this on his own without getting approval from Pentagon higher ups.
Certainly could be. There was another story that linked to from Consortium News that was pushback on the chemical weapons thing. And with Biden saying, we think Russia's, could well launch a chemical weapons attack. This guy pushing back against that. And I forget whether he was an anonymous Pentagon guy.
The thing I don't understand about this bleed him dry theory is he's supposed to be like the proverbial frog boiling in water, and it happens so slowly that he doesn't realize he's about to lose power, and then all of a sudden he's deposed. At some point on this road to humiliation, he's going to say, wait, I'm on the road to humiliation. I better up the ante with chemical weapons or nukes. So it doesn't avoid the threat of escalation and nuclear war.
No, I mean, there are certainly perils to trying to push a guy toward regime change if he controls a lot of nuclear weapons, and of course, a lot of the people who seem to favor this kind of, Afghanistan strategy of bleeding him dry, pushing him into a corner, are people who profess to think he's borderline crazy in the first place. So I don't really see how they square all that.
Is there any evidence other than the Niall Ferguson piece that is actually anybody's strategy?
You've just heard speculation. There's a certain amount of speculation, including informed speculation by, I should say speculation by, foreign policy, respectable foreign policy sages.
So he's heard the same speculation, and he does cite one British official saying, our number one preferred outcome is a long, drawn-out war.
Yeah, I personally doubt that Biden himself is looking for that. I like to think that his main go-to person for guidance here is Bill Burns, who's head of the CIA, probably knows more about Russia than anybody else in the administration, is probably more sensible than anybody else in the administration. Somebody like Victoria Nuland in the State Department might be in favor of the bleed them dry thing. Blinken, I'm not sure. I don't know.
Biden either would not be for it or would be at such a high and cocooned level that he wouldn't even have thought about it. Is that possible? No.
Oh, I think he's a reasonably savvy person about foreign policy.
He's gone on a lot of junkets to Europe. Yeah.
I mean, but he's always had he would be aware of the issue, I think.
You're right.
Even now.
You're right.
But I see them as, responding somewhat just to political pressures, having broad, maybe geostrategic goals. But I personally think it's nuts to want to prolong something like this in hopes that you'll magically get regime change when every day brings a risk of it turning into a wider war, which could in turn become a nuclear war. I think that's crazy.
If that strategy is not in fact the Biden strategy and they cut some sort of deal, that's a huge triumph for Biden, right?
I suspect. I mean, a lot of people are going to have trouble swallowing that Putin got territorial gains by invading a country.
Not the American people.
Well,
maybe in the blob.
Well, the American people don't care to begin with about foreign policy. It's all about the blob, and specific interest
Not on
groups.
Election day.
Yeah, but the people largely believe what the blob tells them to believe. The liberals believe what MSNBC tells them to believe. Who does MSNBC have on to talk about this? Who does Fox have on? Who does CNN have on? Who does,
I don't think so. I think we've seen time and time again that what my friend John Ellis says, the audience programs the network doesn't program the audience. And the audience often resists, and then the network changes its tune. All the network cares about is ratings.
I think and all the evidence, if you look at the whole Trump experiment, where he starts saying stuff nobody said about foreign policy, and it just doesn't hurt him, right? But then you get to this point with the Ukraine war, and the people who think they're following in his footsteps on the right and saying what they think he would say, which is screw Ukraine, well, that doesn't work for them either. I mean...
Well, that's the point, because the audience resisted it.
I don't think the audience...
Because 80% of Americans want Zelensky to win, and the narrative is Zelensky is a hero. And so you can't get up and say,
well, look,
if Zelensky endorses a deal, you can't say this deal's a disaster. The hero has endorsed it. He was on the Oscars, Bob.
Well, I agree. I mean, in this case, I would say a lot of the grassroots opinion has been shaped by the resistance, Russiagate, and so on. I mean, it's true that this narrative, I mean, by the time Russia invaded Ukraine, the narrative was pretty much inevitable by virtue of, but I would say it's really not so much because most Americans actually have strong views on foreign policy. It's because liberals had come to think Ukraine good, Russia evil, because that's what the impeachment was about. And Trump was pro-Russian. It's not... You're right that the grassroots opinion mattered, but not because people in the grassroots have well-thought-out views on foreign policy, I don't think.
I also think they don't like a country that's a democracy being invaded by a country that they don't think is a democracy.
Yeah, no, or invasion, period. I mean, you're right. I agree with all that. There are certainly some basic instincts that people have.
It's amazing how many people on the right went in a sort of more pro-Putin direction, and some of them have backtracked, like Tucker, sort of. But there's some amazing things that I saw that, like Charlie Kirk said, or that Madison Cawthorn said, that I don't think they've backtracked from.
But there aren't many of them. And how's your friend J.D. Vance doing, having said, I don't care about Ukraine one way or the other? Is he continuing to repeat that? I doubt it.
I don't think so. I think he's backed off that. He backed off that pretty quickly. He won the debate. He got a favorable tweet from Donald Trump Jr. Bob. He's in third place.
What I'd give.
He's in striking distance. It's all going according to plan.
Can I say one more thing about the war? Just that a couple of thoughts I had before today's seemingly encouraging news from Russia about this reframing of their war aims. At the same time, I do think, on balance, Ukraine's been so good at the information war, there is a tendency to overstate how strong their position is. There was a good piece in the New York Times today. There's been all this publicity about how they're rolling the Russians back about Kyiv. This was kind of a contrarian take, a reported piece from that area, and here's how it reads. But signs of actual on-the-ground progress were elusive, meaning in terms of the Ukrainian counterattacks. He goes on, Ukrainian forces have been unable to demonstrate they control villages or towns previously held by the Russian army. In Makariv, another battleground town to the west of Kyiv that Ukrainian officials claim to have recaptured this week, the fighting was also ongoing. Vadym Tokar, the mayor, said in a telephone interview, quote, this is the mayor talking, I don't understand where this nonsense came from. He said of reports his town had been liberated. It is not true. We have shelling and we have Russian tanks shooting into the town right now. So, and the other thing is, remember, Putin, he must have had some kind of awakening about miscalculating or getting bad information. But I think the one thing he doesn't believe that we may assume he believes is that, well, it turns out the Ukrainian people hate Russia and don't want to be liberated. Remember, his narrative all along is that this thing is being orchestrated by the West. I think he believes it. And I think, look, we are supplying a lot of weapons. And I think more than we realize, probably you and I realize, the Pentagon is directly involved in providing intelligence and even helping with strategic and tactical guidance. I suspect Putin thinks this war is being run out of the Pentagon, and he may not be as far from wrong as as we think.
The satellite intelligence is always an issue, and nobody has been talking about that.
What do you mean?
Are we providing Ukraine with satellite images
totally.
that help them in the war?
I think we're giving them everything we have.
That's okay. And also we trained the troops. We trained their army before the war started.
I think this may be what the reason the invasion happened now. Putin made it clear, every passing month just about, he made it clear that this was becoming a de facto NATO outpost. More and more weapons. And he was afraid he was going to lose what ground he had secured in the Donbass under more and more of a Ukrainian onslaught. But
he could have just had a minor incursion in the Donbass, Bob.
Well, look, that's what I expected, as you may recall. That's what most people who thought he would invade expected. And now that's apparently what the Russians are going to claim their only goal was. But again, the reason I just said what I said is this is a long way from over. I doubt Putin has totally relinquished dreams of something grander. There's the question of the land bridge. He
may pull back now and then get a second wave of hubris later on. I noticed the original story about, I guess, Makareev said Ukraine liberates suburb, and then in the second paragraph it says, of course, it also lost 3 other suburbs nearby.
Right. That's about the way it's going. They did blow up. They did blow up a ship, which is impressive.
Well, a point for boys who like gadgets. The tanks are obviously. I mean, it's an obvious point. Are becoming not obsolete, but they're a much less effective weapon of war than they used to be. Because they've discovered they have all these new weapons that can take them out, and Putin may have over-relied on tanks.
I hadn't thought of that. Whether this is really a qualitative change by virtue of these these
the drones and the javelin and the drones.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's I don't when I turn on TV, I don't want to see sympathetic pictures of refugee children with their little teddy bears. I want to know tanks versus drones. What new gadget works?
Yeah,
and who's winning the war? I want to know who's winning the war. I don't want to. The refugees are, we got to deal with them either way.
And it's hard. It's hard to find a media outlet that gives you good updates on the strategic situation, right? I'm having a lot of trouble.
There was one that Ellis linked to that I retweeted that seems on the ball. Bizarrely, Tim Mack of NPR, even though he doesn't seem to go anywhere near the front lines, he's always in some other part of the country, he sort of conveys to you the latest info that he's gotten without any particular bias, who's doing what to whom. He had this incredibly gripping story of meeting a guy in a bar who's, he's a part-time volunteer and he's a sniper, and he was in a battle and his buddy had his face blown off and he was blind, and the buddy said, "I'm not going to die, am I? I have a girlfriend." And it was just incredibly moving. He died.
He died.
Anyway, he died. He didn't have a face anyway, so his life would have been different. But anyway, it's brought it home. What can I say? So we have some other things to talk about if we have time.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot to set the timer. We were going to set a timer this time, right? So that we don't exhaust ourselves. Wow, we're already at like 38 minutes. I'll set an egg timer. Yeah, well, there's the zany Ginni Thomas, Clarence Thomas's wife. I now see what he sees in that woman. I'll tell you, she's a live wire.
Don't
you think?
Yeah, he likes it when she's angry. She really.
We should tell people, in case they missed this. So okay. She was in a text exchange with Mark Meadows, Trump's chief of staff, on January 6th issues, and a couple of issues are raised. I mean, one would be, could this be taken by the Trump administration of a kind of signaling from Clarence Thomas that, hey, if you can get this to the Supreme Court, you got one vote. Right? I mean, it would be reasonable for Trump to take it that way. Anyway, go. Trump
assumed he got all the votes of everybody he appointed, which was insane. I just first, I'm obviously, this is motivated reasoning on my part, but it seems to me she's not her husband.
I agree. She's not.
My father was a judge. My mother occasionally went to anti-war demonstrations and held placards and things like that. And my father was troubled for the obvious reason, but I don't think he stopped her. This was obviously much worse. And the other thing you can say in her defense, and it's more substantial, is she really believed the election was stolen. It's not like she said, which is the ultra crazy right wing. We lost the election. We want to overturn it anyway. She's an activist. She's always been an activist, and it seems. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too sympathetic.
Let me just read one of her texts to Mark Meadows. Help this great president stand firm, Mark. You are the leader with him, who is standing for America's constitutional governance at the precipice. The majority knows Biden and the left is attempting the greatest heist of our history, meaning stealing the election.
That's the tweet that's the message I was going to say, that shows she really believes it was a heist.
Oh, of course she does.
Okay, so what was so terrible about what she did?
I think it's inappropriate for Supreme Court justice.
I guess it was on the 6th. I guess it was on the 6th.
Was that on January 6th? I think it's totally 100% inappropriate for the spouse of a Supreme Court justice to be communicating with the office of the president in this way. Call me old-fashioned. I'm crazy.
Well,
there are these three branches of government. Okay, call me crazy.
The old theory was you can't, spouses of their own people, women's liberation. You can't say that the spouses have the job of their husbands. They have every right to express themselves. And then the Washington Monthly line, which I usually toe, is your line, which is, no, you have to give up some things in life. If you're married to somebody who's a government official, like a senator, you can't go be a lobbyist for General Motors. Of course, that happens all the time in Washington, that the spouse of a congressman is a lobbyist for General Motors. I think that's what happened with Dingell, I believe. So,
no, I mean, I would say
the conventional wisdom is on my side. The Washington Monthly wisdom is on your side.
Yeah, but I would emphasize that it works both ways. A husband is bound just as a wife is, and half of recent Supreme Court appointments have been women. So
basically, which way Thomas is going to vote, and
Look, I'm a stickler for propriety. I mean, just err on.
No, it's just
my view about norms is just don't fuck with them. And then Meadows says, this is a fight of good versus evil. Evil always looks like the victor until the King of Kings triumphs. I don't know if that means Trump or Christ. Could go either way. Do not grow weary. Good means Q. Do not grow weary in well-doing, which presumably is a Bible verse. Yeah. The fight continues. I have staked my career on it. And then he adds, well, at least my time in D.C. on it. She replies, thank you, needed that. This plus a conversation with my best friend just now. Now, is best friend code for her husband? I don't know.
I think it is.
Do you? Because the reporter the reporter didn't suggest that, but I thought it might be.
I read a report that said they call themselves best friends, but but that could just be, liberals agitating. So I don't know, but it could, and that would be more in the direction of what you're saying, which is, what Abe Fortas used to say. I was talking to my friend when he was a lobbyist. He would always imply that his friend Lyndon was on board with him, right? When Johnson was president. So that's a way of invoking the power without,
or the big man, as Hunter Biden would say, the big man. No Hunter Biden news, right? We talked about that last week.
She may be in trouble, but it's not. I don't think it's going to go anywhere.
No, I don't see where it can go. She didn't do anything illegal, I don't think. Now there is the issue of whether. Well, no, that's not much of an issue. It turns out this was probably not among the documents that he voted on disclosing. Never mind.
There are the hearings for our new justice, and I don't have all that much to say about them, except that I have always thought that child pornography was dealt with too harshly, so it doesn't really bothers me. Well,
that's a slate pitch. You should write this.
No, this is. I assume that there's a whole school of thought. You're born, you have these lusts, okay? They're bad lusts. You lust after little kids. It's in your fucking genes, okay? What are you supposed to do? Commit suicide? I mean, take a drug that suppresses your libido for your entire life, castrate yourself, and there's virtually nothing else you can do that's legal. You can't look at animation. I think that's been declared illegal.
Animation of children?
Of children having sex or whatever child porn is. I wouldn't know. I'm not Pete Townsend, Bob.
This is a good idea. I'm not kidding you entirely, because I thought the ultimate harm that we're concerned about is that if you buy child porn, you traffic it, you are encouraging the exploitation of the kids in the first place to create the child porn.
I think there was a Hollywood executive who was busted for animation, and it was upheld.
Well,
there was a guy in prison who was busted for writing a fantasy in his diary. Okay, now maybe
that's a totally different kettle of fish.
Maybe he was on probation, so he had.
See, this is where I would draw the line: is between pictures of actual children and all that other shit, which does not involve harming a child in the creation of it.
That's where I would draw the line too. That is not where the line is drawn, I don't think.
Well, anyway, I don't think that's what she's getting raked over the coals for. It's not animation that she gave them light sentences for. She's getting raked over the coals for sentencing one guy who had the real thing to 3 months in prison. And then 3 months, and then he did it again when he got out, of course. Ted Cruz was complaining about a 5-year sentence.
Okay, well. Anyway, it just seems to me, pedophiles they're sort of worse than murderers in our society. I mean, they're hated with the hot heat of 1,000 suns, and maybe they should be hated with a little less, although they should be hated.
Mickey, anyway, I just want to say, people who have children when you get crucified for this take, I just want to pledge that I will not stand by your side and defend you.
People who have children seem to feel differently.
I was about to do another contrarian take, but I figure I'll just leave.
Go ahead.
I'll let you focus on your own damage control.
Yours is the contrarian take.
There is a conflation of true classic pedophilia, which is sexual attraction to prepubescent people it's like Jeffrey Epstein, what he did was horrible, illegal, and so on, deserves his fate, and so on, but it wasn't, strictly speaking, clinical pedophilia in the old-fashioned sense of the word, because they were post-pubescent.
Okay. You're the guy who said child porn anime is fine, Bob. You're going to be on the roasting on the spit soon.
I carefully avoided articulating that sentence. So if anybody,
you're going to be in the next cell over, Bob.
Mickey, the only person who can be taken out of context in a video clip saying that is you, because you just said it. We can cut this clip narrowly enough for you to have said that, and I'm going to see that happens.
That would be taken out of context.
Happens.
So, other than that, I don't have that much to say. Dahlia Lithwick wrote what looked like an interesting slate pitch on how the Democrats actually didn't defend Jackson nearly enough. That only Cory Booker.
Cory should have put more emotion into it than he did.
No, that other people should have backed Cory up, I think is her point. I'm sure I disagree with her judicial philosophy, but
you will defend to the death her right to articulate it.
No, I just think she's going to be confirmed, and why have a fight about it?
Yeah, that's why I have not been paying much attention. I mean, I think even Joe Manchin's not in the mood to torpedo this, and that's the only question.
He announced that today.
Oh, did he? Well, good.
Yeah.
There you go.
You're eerily prescient, as always.
As always.
So there's one more meaty topic.
What would that be?
Well, when I was in When I was in college, a friend of mine, and I'm pretty sure it was a guy named Dan Swanson, who became a big left-wing journalist, had this phrase for when you want to chase after a woman, but she has a boyfriend. And when that happens, the boyfriend is the dink, and you have to move the dink. You have to get the dink out of the picture. Okay?
Why was he called the dink?
It's because Swanson was an imaginative guy. He also called typewriters heaters. Okay,
Heaters. What did
heaters.
What did he call heaters?
I don't know.
Dinks.
But anyway, he was an inventive guy. That's why he was a leader among men. But so both parties have a dink problem, right? The Democrats have to move Kamala Harris, and the Republicans have to move Donald Trump. They're both dinks.
Meaning move them off stage.
Yeah, get them off the stage, get them out of the campaign, get them out of the election, and as candidates. And who's, I would think the Democrats have the easier job of it because Harris will not win a primary. So all they have to do is beat Harris in a primary and she's gone, although that might do some damage. They may want to avoid that. So there was this weird... Go ahead.
Yeah. Are you assuming Joe is not running?
Yes. And one possibility is that Joe runs. This is a crazy idea I had this week. Joe runs, and then halfway through the campaign, he says, "No, I'm dropping out. I want, and that puts Harris on her back foot because she hasn't had time to gear up a campaign. It sort of puts her on a level playing field with all the other guys and girls who are running. So that'd be one way for him to put his thumb on the scale against Kamala, as if he hadn't picked her. But probably that's not going to happen. But there was this weird this book about the Biden White House by Martin and Burns of the New York Times. There was a little part of it was in the press this week about how Jill didn't like Kamala. I think we sort of knew that before, but the White House sort of thought Kamala was a whiner, and the problem was not she was being dissed by the Biden White House. The problem with Kamala was Kamala, and it was sort of it could be interpreted as a message to Kamala. And the question is, the book isn't published until May 3rd, right? Usually you don't leak tidbits from books over a month in advance. You would only do it if there was some ulterior purpose.
Do you smell a conspiracy, Mickey?
Like the people in the White House wanted you to drop this onto Kamala as a warning shot. Yes. But is the warning shot, shape up and stop whining, or is the warning shot, don't think you're going to be the candidate in 2024? I don't know.
So wait, was this leaked or was it formally released as an excerpt?
Either one, it doesn't matter. Why would you do that a month before?
Well, I mean, because one requires the administration somehow persuading the publisher to do something they don't think is in their interest. Anybody can leak it. Anybody can get a hold of the thing and leak it. No, I'm sure it was official. But I'm sure it had the blessing of the reporters. So you think somebody in the Biden administration went to their editor or to them or something and said, "Now, I know it would be better for your book if you waited 3 weeks, but we think it's in the national interest to push Kamala off stage."
I think these people talk to their sources in the White House every day, and maybe one of them said, "We'd like to send a warning shot," or something like that. And the reporters were savvy enough to realize if they didn't leak the book, it was use it or lose it. Somebody else was going to fire the warning shot and not them. So they weren't going to get any publicity out of it. And they wanted to keep these guys as sources because they have bigger fish to fry than this. So they pleased their sources by leaking it. It doesn't mean that they are pro-Biden zealots who want to do what the administration wants. It just meant they were fulfilling their sources' wishes in a sort of transactional vein.
Seems a little far-fetched to me.
Would you want something from your book leaked more than a month in advance?
No, that's my point. I wouldn't do it under any circumstances. If they said leaking your book a month in advance, putting your book out before it's commercially optimal, putting this excerpt out will prevent nuclear war, I'd say I'd rather go down with the planet than do something that's bad for my book.
There are Amazon pre-orders, so maybe it's possible that the bookseller order depends on how many Amazon pre-orders there are, and they want to gin up the Amazon pre-orders.
Okay, but
it may be that the mechanics of bookselling has.
I think
changed.
That's true. I think that's true,
Yeah.
and that could explain it without your conspiracy theory.
Right.
So you lose. We agree that you lose?
No, either one could be right, or they both could be right, or they both could be wrong.
Anyway, I think
what
what this makes me think about is the possibility, moving both Trump and Kamala off stage. Third party ticket, Trump and Kamala, same ticket. What do you think?
Well, it is true that when there's a candidate that nobody likes, when there's two candidates that nobody likes, it does sort of cry out for third party.
Yeah.
Now, we've been in that situation before, although
let's make this happen.
Never quite as intensely as it's going to be felt if it is either Biden and Trump or Kamala and Trump. But who would that person be? Evan McMullin? Romney almost endorsed him.
I don't know.
That was a big scandal.
Who do we want it to be? Well, you and I would have different views. Instead, who do we want to be the Democratic candidate?
Oh, God.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard for me.
It depends on whether Trump is on the Republican
refundable
ticket.
child tax credit, Bob.
Yeah, and that's a deal breaker.
You betcha.
It all depends on whether Trump is on the Republican ticket. If he's on the Republican ticket, I just want, I don't want to gamble at all. I just want the candidate most likely to win.
It's obvious who I want the Democratic candidate to be. Joe Manchin.
Joe Manchin. I was just going to say. Yeah.
Our nation turns its lonely eyes to you.
I wonder if he has that in mind, or is he too old to have that in mind?
Well, I don't think he's not too old. He's
70s, early 70s.
I don't know. He has to be younger than Biden. My God.
Well,
I told you when I first came to Washington, Bob Squire took me aside and said they were all running for president.
I think that's true.
So if Joe Manchin doesn't think one day he might be president, he's a weird fish in Washington. Anyway, on the Republican dick moving side, just to give it symmetry.
Yeah.
There was an article by Henry Olson in the Post that was actually fairly convincing. There's a poll out that Trump is beating people who say they'll vote for Trump versus people who say they vote for somebody else for Trump. Trump is winning like 55 to 37 or 32, or I mean, it's just not that far apart. He's not doing that well in polls now. 3.5 years, or 2.5 years out from the election. So Gene McCarthy, somebody who has balls to run against him, and there's going to be more than one because it's so obvious, can be Gene McCarthy, not necessarily beat Trump in an early state, but comes so close that, Trump withdraws for fear of being humiliated. It seems entirely plausible that Trump would just lose.
Who is your favorite on the Republican side? It would be somebody Trump-esque, but not crazy.
Yeah, I mean, the Trump-esque but not crazy people are, they're coming up. The obvious one is DeSantis. So I guess Tom Cotton is too much of a hawk, but he's, Trumpist on domestic policy. Blake Masters and J.D. Vance, if they win their Senate seats, will be too fresh, probably.
J.D. Vance is a total loser, man.
Everybody thinks he's a total loser. I don't know why they have it in for the guy. It must be that he's not slim.
I think his visual appearance does not help, and sadly, that is a factor in politics. Were it not, I might be president right now. But it is. It is.
I think that's the best thing you got going for him, Bob. The lanky.
You think it's downhill after the
lanky
looks?
Cowboy looks. Put on a cowboy hat. Say you're from Texas. You're halfway there.
Okay, whatever you say.
And you are from Texas.
I sure am.
It's weird. I heard a congresswoman this weekend who I can't say her name, talking about how her husband, who's a blue collar worker, she goes and talks with her husband's buddies, and they like voting for women who are good looking. They don't pay that much attention to policy.
Imagine.
I had never thought that was actually as powerful. I thought we had a leg up if you were good looking, but like I would thought that people on the right would despise Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Maybe not.
Every one of them secretly lusts after AOC. That explains all their behavior, all of it.
Somebody should write a book about that.
It's in the works.
Okay. So
we should. So we're now at the. I think we're at the 1 hour mark.
And the other completely crazy theory, just because this is the place to go for crazy theories.
Yeah.
Is this theory that 2 journalists wrote about this week, which is that Biden will drop out now before the midterms to prevent massive losses in the midterms. That's too crazy even for me, I think. But maybe not, because they still have to move the dink of Kamala, or else it'll be a disaster.
I'd like to think he's going to bow out, but I fear he's not. And, I think he could do it in a way that would secure him a great place in the history books. I was this transitional figure. I moved Trump off stage, but then I saw that it was in the interest of the nation to,
You think he's going to run in 2024? Or you think he's...
I don't see signs that he's not. People are incredible. They never give up power. Is Putin giving up power? Nobody. Males never give up power. Females, sometimes. God bless them. Will that get me canceled? I can say that.
What about Tom Brady? He resigned. He retired. Oh, wait.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect example. Whereas the other news this week, a 25-year-old female tennis player who apparently was ranked #1 in the world, which I didn't even realize, retired. Okay.
He won Wimbledon.
Yeah. I mean, I saw
her interview. It was semi-moving.
I haven't seen it.
Anyway, it said, I think it's, anyway, never mind. I'm about to get myself in real trouble, so I won't.
I've already done a certain amount of that, I think, and I don't know.
But if Biden reaches a successful outcome in Ukraine, it's a huge incentive for him not to run again, because he can go up on an up note, right?
Yeah, and I think there's a chance that this will happen, but there's a lot of unknowns. This thing ain't over, and at any point it could take a crazy turn. But we'll see. And we can. So in the Parrot Room, first of all, I have a public service announcement, Mickey. You know your dear friend Aryeh Cohen-Wade, who has nothing but kind things to say about you?
Yes, even he got a blue check, and he's not reading me anymore.
Did he get a blue check? You're making that up.
Yes. Now I'm trolling you. And boy, did that work.
Now you are trolling. So anyway, his show, Culturally Determined, now has its own podcast feed. And when it is video, which I think it is sometimes, its own YouTube channel. So look for that in your podcast app. It had previously been part of the Bloggingheads TV feed. There's some, I don't know, there's also some Bloggingheads related rebranding news that maybe we'll talk about in the Parrot Room. Yeah, that'll bring them in. By the way, okay, I'm writing that down. Bloggingheads rebranding. Now, by the way, Mickey.
I'm interested in this too.
Yeah, you will be. You may not like it. You may not like it.
Only finding out you're fired when you read it in the newspapers. This is worse than that.
It's not worse than
when
that.
You hear about it in a podcast where you're on camera.
You may not like it. It'll be a very dramatic moment when I break it to you. Now, speaking of that, do you realize, Mickey, that we are the number of patrons, the Parrot Room, the people have gone to patreon.com/Parrot Room and signed up so that they get to hear our after hours, our after party podcast every Friday. That number is now tantalizingly close to 1,100. It's 1096. And
it was 1097 an hour ago.
I have bad news for you. But here's what I want to know is how can the people out there right now listening to this, how can they know that you and I are so close to the 1,100 mark and just stand there and not sign up? Just walk on by, right? You see human suffering, you do nothing. How can they do that? Do you get it? Do you understand it?
Is that such a milestone? I would think 1,000 was a bigger milestone than 1,100.
Remind me not to take
2,000.
pay you for PR.
I'm the world's
consulting.
worst PR person.
No, I am I am the world's worst PR
a
person.
A professor once promoted my book to a bunch of college students, and I was filled with pangs of guilt that these college students, who were rich kids, they were at fucking Rice University, okay, were going to spend $20 of their money on my book. So I said, you don't have to buy this. He was pissed off.
I came this close to going to Rice, transferring to Rice.
Rice is a good deal.
It is a good school.
It's also cheaper than other schools, I think.
So anyway, I don't know. I don't know how they can do it, but it is within the power of people out there to push us over that mark and make us feel a little bit better about the whole blue checkmark situation, right? That would take a little of the pain inflicted by the blue checkmark situation away. Am I wrong?
Oh. No, it would. It would definitely help.
So you can help this kid, or you can turn the page.
Exactly. And so
what do we need to talk about in the Parrot Room?
There are apparently some drawings of Bob Saget's injuries that lead one to think that the story we're getting is not the real story. So in the break, I'm going to try to find these drawings. But I'd put that to bed as like, yes, the official story is right. And I'm now being told, no, I'm wrong. So
folks, I just want to clarify here. Assuming you don't, out of sheer compassion, sign up for the Parrot Room, we will be talking about possible drawings of the late comedian Bob Saget.
Maybe I shouldn't have led with that item. That's not so good. Will Republicans blow the midterms, especially the Senate? I don't know. There's some news this week that makes it not look so good. Why is preschool bad for kids?
Yeah.
I have two theories.
Didn't we talk about that last week?
Yeah, but you had a crappy theory that maybe they're bad teachers. There are two better theories.
That really hurt, man. But go ahead.
And there's one new theory that I have. There's some interesting work about symmetry that I don't understand. Symmetry is not produced by natural selection, Bob.
In the sense of physics or biology?
Physical symmetry.
Actually, there's a school of thought that it is produced by favored in some situations by natural selection.
Right. Well,
maybe you know more than I do. Okay.
This is a dissent from that. And there's Dave Rubin's child is controversial.
He has a child?
He and his same-sex partner, are having a child via surrogate. Two children via surrogate, one with his genes, one with the partner's genes. And the right has embraced it, and then the right's having second thoughts. Say, wait, are we really embracing this? And there's my pal Zemmour in France not my pal, sorry. My boy Zemmour in France is not doing as well as I thought he would do.
That's sad.
For an interesting reason.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to say, you don't get that for free, folks. You don't get to know why this person you've never heard of and don't care about is doing a little worse.
I didn't mean to be callous about Bob Saget. But it is a mystery.
See, that's the thing about the Parrot Room is, like, we're sensitive people. We're human beings, and we exhibit remorse and things. That's one of the things you get. In fact, I would not have given that to them for free if I were you, Mickey. Frankly, I want to talk a little bit about. I finished the Oliver Stone documentary about Ukraine. Not a masterpiece. I mean, he's the executive producer. He's not the hands-on, but he did the interviews with like Putin and so on, and a little bit of further illumination into the Putin psychology situation, I think, since I discussed it a little last week, but now I finished it. I want to talk about the question being raised, like, is it smart for Biden to be talking about the Russians using chemical weapons? Is that an invitation for a false flag attack? How nefarious a role is Chuck Todd playing in all this? I want to mention the Chris Hayes, Glenn Greenwald retweet situation is also related to something I'm realizing about how it's looking like in foreign policy the Blob has won again. I mean, just the way the Ukraine thing is reinforcing and amplifying and winning converts to their narrative. I mean, my side just cannot win in this crazy old world, even though on the merits it should, because it's my side.
I don't know the Glenn Greenwald, Chris Hayes thing, so you will fill us in on what it means.
Right.
What
So
it is.
I'm being tactically cryptic.
Okay.
What else? Any? I keep meaning to this Ukraine thing.
You have three. You're supposed to have five, Bob.
Okay, I'll talk about myself. Well, there are some comments. They just this OJ Simpson trial thing is of continued interest to our commenters, apparently. So maybe I'll at least get into that a little bit.
Have you seen the documentary My Architect?
No, my sister-in-law has been praising it forever. Somebody recommended it to us. What's the guy's name? Khan? What's his name?
Khan is the architect, and this is one of his many children who did it.
Why don't you talk about that in the Parrot Room?
I will talk about it.
I now feel I must watch it because my sister-in-law just has been recommending it.
It's a great. Well, I'll explain why it's a great documentary, and
good.
Also, it has nothing to do. It has very little to do with architecture.
No, I understand.
Architects hate it. It does have something to do with architecture, but anyway, okay.
All right. So I guess that's it. We're heading into the Parrot Room, patreon.com/Parrot Room. We'll give you a quick free glance at the parrot, won't we, Mickey?
Parrot's going to show a little leg.
It's showing more than that right now.
Show a little leg. Show a little leg. The parrot is pushing
the Parrot
daisies.
Room we will get the parrot to utter that phrase in the Parrot Room.
The parrot is nailed to the perch.
The parrot is nailed to the perch. We'll see it in the Parrot Room.
Okay.